So now we're going to look through the progression, and there are 3 quotes to help us better understand the progression. Contemplate with thine inward eye the chain of successive revelations that hath linked the manifestation of Adam with that of the Bab. The fundamental basis which comprises all spiritual beings. That is to say, it refers to the spiritual virtues and divine qualities. This does not change nor alter. It is the Holy of Holies, which is the essence of the law of Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Christ, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. Say, we have revealed our verses in 9 different modes. Each one of them bespeaketh the sovereignty of God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. A single one of them sufficeth for a proof unto all who are in the heavens and on the earth. Yet the people, for the most part, persist in their heedlessness.
Okay, I would just like to say that as far as how each one of them is a proof, there is a story in each of these manifestations that actually teach the eternal truth. Love, compassion, truth, justice are in each one of them, although in a different level of institution. And I want to go back, I'm going to show some of these by going back and showing a new way of looking at these manifestations. But here's what's really interesting. This chain, if you look at it, has a message, and then we're going to come back and read that last little verse. Let's start, though, by starting with the beginning. Now, the first world Baha'u'llah has revealed to us is called the matrix of nature. It's the spirit of nurturing and innocent childhood. It is what has been referred to in the Bible as the Garden of Eden. It's where nature took care of us. Nature impelled us forward. We were not responsible. We were like children. When we can understand the evolutionary process takes us from, you might say, conception, God's conception of the universe, to where we arrived at a stage where we were ready to take some responsibility. And so we might call that our spiritual childhood, or where nature took care of everything. Now you notice children are this way. They are born in the world, they are dressed, they are fed, they are loved, and they are warmed by outside forces. And they just have to cooperate with the environment. But there comes a time when they have to start thinking for themselves and taking responsibility for their decisions. And that we call the age of adolescence. And I suggest to you that what Baha'u'llah is teaching us is that Adam is not the first existing being. There were many, but he's, you might say, the first adolescent. He brought the adolescent spirit of beginning to have to make some tough decisions based on being challenged.
So the matrix of nature, the spirit of nurturing and innocent childhood, evolutionary development, intentional self-centeredness, maybe heedless or satanic, innocent self-centeredness. This is childhood, more angelic, a childhood of superstition and ignorance.
Now, what I'm trying to point out here is, I would tell it in this story. If you heard of this kid who doubled up his fists and started beating on his mother, I mean just really with all of his might, a certain sense of outrage and resentment for this action would take place. You would look at this, say, teenager doing this, and you would just really be incensed that he would do such a thing to his mother. But if someone's telling you this story of this tremendous happening, and then they find out that it's a 2-year-old beating on his mother's leg because he wants more milk, your attitude completely changes. A 2-year-old's beating is not much of a beating. the mother can laugh at the insistence of the egocentric 2-year-old. But at 14 or 13, that's a different story. Why? Because we know he should know better. We know he's matured to a level the same action is repulsive, i.e. satanic, versus when they're 2 years old, it's what goes with being a child. As a result, we've got to understand this is this great story of Satan and being cast out of heaven. Heaven was the matrix of nature. And when Adam was, when Lucifer symbolizes innocent childhood, he's an angel, he's perfect. But there comes a time when the child has to give way to the adolescence and needs to, in effect, give up self-centeredness as being the driving force. It's okay when you're a child, you're learning about being alive. But there comes a time when you're more aware of a spiritual awareness of higher virtues and more noble actions. And now that behavior becomes repulsive. Now, some people don't let this insistence or the self-centeredness take its lesser role, and it stays prominent in their life. Hence, the evil of the world comes when the self does not give way to the spiritual realities and becomes insistent and in fact dominates our spiritual life. That is what produces evil. If you really think about it, all evil in the world is caused by the self-centeredness of humans. And natural disasters are part of the condition of life. Those we have to cope with. But they're not evil, because death is not the end of the journey. It's only a stepping stone to other dimensions. But we won't get into all that today. Let's take the next one, Adamic stage.
So the Adamic stage, which follows the matrix of nature, is the spirit of awakening, awakened by the breath of spiritual life, responsible to choose between good and evil. The soul self versus the insistent self, and the introduction of a power greater than self.
In this case, both the soul self and the insistent self have to give way to the reality of God as a conscious decision to go God's way. Because God has, what Adam was a prophet of God who introduced a better way than what nature had previously allowed. So what we were allowed to do in nature was now being challenged by a better way to do things. And we'll get into that in a little later, how that worked out. But that's the choice that every, shall we say, teenager, and I use that loosely, but it happens at different times, but basically somewhere around 12, 13 years old, we become aware that we have to start making some decisions of our own. And just at that time, a phenomena takes place. We biologically change, and puberty takes place. And the challenge that puberty presents is the challenge of the tree from which they were not to eat from.